Run it back, Philly. No frauds, no fanboys, no intros.
You're up by 21 points in the first quarter. I've been saying the biggest thing with this team is surviving the non-Embiid minutes. Joel Embiid sits down towards the end of the first quarter, and in 3 minutes, they blow an entire 21-point lead, and it is a 3-point game. Couple minutes into the second quarter, Montrezl Harrell at the end of the first quarter was a minus 15 in 1 minute. 1 minute he was a minus 15. It's unreal. And then Doc had to accept the fact that wasn't working and had to play Paul Reed the rest of the game, which didn't end up making a huge difference. But I feel like if you didn't blow an entire 21-point lead in a couple of minutes, you stood a chance of maintaining a lead throughout the rest of this game. The backup center thing is it's something that, hopefully we try our best to fix at the deadline, but at least it's something that they are basically admitting that they have to fix, not like, well, Doc's going to figure it out or I'm going to roll with Trez and this is what it's going to be. At least we know that I think they're going to try to make a move. Do you think it has to be somebody that Daryl Morey thinks that Doc Rivers will play? You know what I mean? Like
That's true. Yeah, it's important to consider because
I see players like Jericho Sims. I see players like these dudes that come up that are just young and can jump out of the gym, and it's just, is Doc going to play him, or does it have to be a 31-year-old veteran that he trusts? Trust is everything with Doc Rivers. You know what I mean?
It's true. Yeah, no, you're definitely right there. I would say. I mean, look, I think that any decision that is made at this deadline, Doc will have input. He has input on the roster. And if there is a guy that Morey, I'll put it like this. If there's a guy that Morey thinks can really move the needle and is a viable, playable backup big, whether it's a 4 or 5, whatever it is, he needs to trade Montrezl Harrell if he thinks that there's any chance that Doc could play Montrez over him, because we know the Montrez thing never works in the playoffs. He's historically been one of the worst playoff performers of the past decade. Like, it's every time he's on the court, his team bleeds points. He's actually been a pretty positive regular season player, and he's not even really there anymore due to the kind of the decline in athleticism, the things that you talked about. So I think that there are two guys that that I'm sure we'll get into that I really think would be fantastic when it comes to this. And I think that if they are available and they're at a reasonable price and Morey can acquire them, there will have to be some sort of conversation, or else Doc Rivers will be gone after the year. Like, it's just like we can't do the same things over and over and expect different results.
Right. I think he's going to be gone at the end of the year anyway. If I really had to predict it, when people ask me if I had to, if it was a bet that I had to make, I would say something deep into the playoffs, decision-wise, is going to happen within a 7-game series that's going to get Doc Rivers up out of here. I've been thinking that this whole season, kind of predicted it last season, but then we get a new version of James Harden or a more in-shape, energized, bouncy version of James Harden and Maxey year 3 and DeAnthony Melton. So the teams, some things happen, and I'm like, all right, maybe it's not, but I just wouldn't be shocked if they fall short and Doc Rivers does get fired at the end of this season. I hope they give him. I hate saying give him what he needs, because it has to be, again, it's like such a specific player, because it has to be a player that he trusts and that he plays. But I would love for them to give him what he needs and him go win a championship with the Sixers. But we'll just see if it happens.
I was frustrated over the backup center thing. Obviously, Montrez played horribly again, which I've said time and time again, the only time you can trust Montrez to have a decent game is when you're playing against like the Charlotte Hornets or the Washington Wizards or one of the mid to bad teams that he played against or played for in the past. Seems to only be playing well in the games that truly don't matter at all. And in any sort of regular competition, whether it's against basically a non-lottery team, Montrez is going to be virtually unplayable. He's proven that time and time again this season. Paul Reed, love B-ball Paul, but it's just like between the fouling, the lack of consistency on offense, he does help us regarding the rebounding issue. He's one of the best competitive rebounders in the NBA, but there are a lot of other warts in his game that make it very clear that he's not going to be the solution. at backup center, especially for this team. So I am kind of like, I can't really be too mad because they've won 20 coming into tonight. They were 22-5 in their last 27 games. They've won some really competitive games. They've won a lot of close games. They've won games against good competition. And they tend to do this thing still where they don't really get up for certain games, but it's troubling only because it's the second game in a week that they have blown a 20-point lead. And with the Sixers history and with all of the same things plaguing the team, especially in a night like tonight where, like, honestly, kind of everyone looked like shit. Like, I know that they were winning early and it looked great, but everyone looked a little bit discombobulated tonight. It was kind of a something across the board. Like, Embiid was not good in the second half, despite the fact that he was like a plus 20 on the game or whatever. So overall, it's only concerning because it's becoming a pattern, but overall, I don't know. I can't really care too much about a February loss when the team is, playing as well as it has been recently. And also when the competition is better, they have shown that they can get up for those big games. And there's 82 games, and it's just like, I don't know. And and once again, like we talked about it, like the biggest problem that they have is backup center, right? Well, what's the one thing that they've been leaking to the media all week?
Yeah.
Leaking to the media, we're getting a backup center. Regardless of what happens this week, the Sixers will have a new backup center in a week. Whether it solves the problems, I don't know. But the fact that they are at least willing to admit and address it is a positive sign to me.
Yeah, I guess, like, how did they not address that in the offseason, Or did Daryl Morey actually think that Montrezl Harrell was the prototypical or the solution at backup center? They released Charles Bassey, who's not really getting – I think he's in the G League now, in San Antonio's G League affiliate. But so, I can't really harp too much on the release of Charles Bassey, because it's not like he's out there getting regular rotation minutes in San Antonio. He plays like once in a blue moon and has a bunch of rebounds that everyone freaks out about. But the more I see him not playing in San Antonio, I can't really continue to harp on that. I was just wondering, like, what did they actually do in the offseason to fix the backup center situation? Or did they really think Montrezl Harrell was the answer, And I overhyped it, but my friend Romp, right when it happened, he said, "This is terrible. Doc's
I was not a fan.
Doc's going to play him a ton." He got fired in LA basically for playing him a ton in that playoff series. And he predicted it on the money. And I wasn't listening to you back then, but I'm judging by, some of the things you've said since I've been listening to you. I would assume that you kind of called that on the money. Also, the Doc Rivers Montrezl Harrell thing. I just can't figure out what they did in the offseason, and now before the trade deadline, they have to try to fix the backup center spot.
Yeah, so I actually had a tweet a month before Montrez was signed by the Sixers, and I said the Sixers are going to sign Montrezl Harrell to a minimum, and it's going to be terrible. I literally called it from a mile away, basically the second that it was obvious that he wasn't going back to the Hornets. But I did say it like this when he first was signed. I said, as an innings eater in the regular season against, like I said, not great competition, I'm sure he will be fine. But I also said, I think that you should make moves with the playoffs in mind, because we know that the Sixers can be a good regular season team. We know the Sixers can win 50 games. We know this. The history has shown that they are one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the East every single year when they have relatively decent health. So no one really cares about that. And it is important to have inning eaters in the regular season to keep your stars fresh for the playoffs. And that was the thought process in my head of why they made the signing was, okay, we're going to roll out there and we're going to have PJ Tucker, we're going to have Paul Reed, and we're going to have Montrezl Harrell. And between the 3 of them, we should be able to find a regular season solution to keep Joel Embiid as fresh as possible for the playoffs. We won't have to play in big minutes. He won't have to play a ton of games. He's going to be more focused, less on winning the MVP and more on getting to the playoffs. Well, that's not necessarily really been the case. He's still playing pretty large number of minutes. He isn't missing a ton of games. And Montrez, while Paul Reed has regressed in some departments, he's fouling, 8 times per 36 minutes this year, which is just completely unsustainable for a guy that needs to play real minutes in the regular season. And then PJ Tucker being completely unplayable at the 5, where he has been somewhat playable in his Houston and Milwaukee days at the 5 in the past, is definitely kind of part of the reason why the Montrez thing looks so bad in retrospect. But like, the reality is you can't really get a lot of good centers for the veterans minimum. Like, I think we got a little bit spoiled with Andre Drummond last year. Like, Drummond being the most competent backup that we've probably had in the Embiid era was a little bit of fool's gold in terms of what the center market can really bring you in free agency if you only have access to the veterans minimums at that point. The real issue is that they spent the biannual exception on Daniel House, who is not even an NBA player.
Run it back, Philly. No frauds, no fanboys, no intros.